Hello, it's Maggie the Cheshire Crafter here. For Christmas this year I received these 4 gifts in a hamper, and it's for sewers. It consists of a scissors case with a pair of scissors inside, a reversible mug rug, a pin cushion, and that's reversible too, and a pin case with pins. Now, I thought this was an ideal project to show you, if you're a beginner, how to use your Singer heavy-duty sewing machine or similar. So this is easy sewing for beginners. First, I'm going to recycle some fabric, but I would suggest that you could make this using 2 contrasting fat quarters. If you have a set of fat quarters, there's usually 7 fabrics in there. Just select 2 that will contrast well. I would suggest using this doggy one and the pink inside, so that you've got a pattern and a contrast. I would use this as your main focus on the outside of your needle case and your scissors case. I'm going to use recycled fabrics from my fabric stash. These were both men's shirts. They're both 100% cotton, and there's a significant contrast between the two. And from these I've taken a sleeve, a long sleeve, and the 2 cuffs. First, I'm going to iron them. I'm going to open all those seams out by ironing them. When I've measured my cuff, this is 8 by 3.5 inches, so that's the size. I'm going to ask you to cut 2 pieces if you're going to cut from another cuff or from your fat quarter. Both of my shirts are this shape, so I normally cut the cut off and I cut the flap that has the button on it, and I've ironed this flat. Now this section is ideal because I want to cut a 6.5 inch piece. I'm going to make sure, because I'm using gingham, that I follow the rows and the lines to make sure I cut on the grain that's in the direction of the fabric. So I'm going to cut once there, and I'll do the same on the other sleeve. I'm using a rotary cutter and an easy rule. This is a 6.5 inch acrylic ruler in a square. I'm going to use an offcut of wadding from my quilting. This is just polyester wadding. It's quite thick. And I've cut 2 pieces that are 6.5 inches square, one that's 8 by 4, and 3 pieces that are 8 by 3.5, and I'm going to keep these scraps because I'll perhaps stuff the pin cushion with that. I've chosen a cotton thread that will match both colours. This is a ruby colour. Now, when you're beginning to sew, I'm going to suggest that if you're sewing cotton, you use cotton thread that's suitable for machine sewing. If you go to somewhere like Hobbycraft, they will have Gutterman's thread. Half of it is for hand stitching, the other is for machine stitching. If in doubt, ask one of the assistants. This happens to be vintage thread because I buy this in bulk and prefer to use this in my machine. The thread that you use on a reel needs to be 36, 40 or 50 weight of cotton thread. This thread is by J&P Coates. I call it Ruby. Right, I'm going to set up my machine and thread a bobbin. So I've got the same cotton in the top of the machine and in the bobbin. Right, I'm at my Singer heavy-duty sewing machine today. I'm at my kitchen table and I don't have much space in my flat to sew, so I use the table end, I use the extension table, and I have things to hand beside me like scissors, pins, thread cutters, threads. I've previously uploaded a video on how to thread your machine and how to load the bobbin and prepare your machine for stitching. If you haven't already seen that, go back and view that now. On my YouTube channel, you'll also find short videos on how to use the auto needle threader and how to change a presser foot to a walking foot. Because I'm going to be going through quilting weights today, I've got my walking foot on. If the mug rug and the scissors holders begin in the same way, I'm taking one of each of the pieces of fabrics and placing them right sides together. Now it's obvious on this main fabric, which is the right side, the gingham looks the same both sides, which is quite helpful here. Place them right sides together, and for each piece I'm going to need a piece of wadding. I'm going to make sure that my raw edges match, so to do this I'm going to use pins. My needle is a 90-14. My tension is set on 4. My needle position is on the right. My width is 5.5 and my stitch length I've set at 2.5, and I selected a straight stitch. I have two things that will help me use a 1/4 inch seam, and that is hemline tape, magnet. That means that when I place my fabric against it, I know that when I start to stitch I'll get a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to stitch all the way round the outside, leaving an opening so I can turn this inside out of about 2 inches. I'm going to use a back stitch at the beginning and the end of that stitching row. To get a back stitch, I need to have my finger on the reverse button for a few stitches and then release. Then press on the foot pedal to go forwards. Sew to a 1/4 inch from the edge, and then with your needle in the down position, lift the presser foot and rotate your fabric 90 degrees. Again, so that your raw edge will come up against the 1/4 inch measure, presser foot down and recommence your stitching. Do that in all your corners. And remove your pins as you go. Cut your threads and then turn it over to make sure that you've caught both fabrics in. And now we're going to turn it inside out. Separate your two fabrics and then pull from the inside out. Now bring those two seams together, ensuring that you've got something of the filling inside your edge, and iron flat. I'm now going to top stitch, which is sewing a 1/4 inch away from the edge all the way around, and that will then close that section. So I'm going to begin and end there. If you're using a fabric like gingham, you can use it to help you sew a straight line. Now from a diamond, I'm going to fold the edges in on themselves and pin them down. Pin it along the outside edge and iron it so it's as flat as you can get. I'm going to try and go over the same stitch line and stitch it down. By the time I get to this bottom end, it's going to be a tight squeeze to try and get that through the machine. Get it as tight a fix as you can, but don't worry if any of your underneath fabric shows through. You're sewing through 6 layers of fabric and 3 layers of wadding here. So if you haven't got a presser foot, I recommend that you do this by hand, but your presser foot will help hold those fabrics in position and take the thickness. At the bottom, I need to remove the pin. Mind your fingers, but I'm going to use the seam ripper as a stilette to try and hold the fabrics in place. Place your scissors inside and then fold over the top. And I just want you to mark in place on the top and the under fabric with 2 pins where you would want to place your popper. This is going to have a mock fastener with a button on the top, decorative purposes only, and a popper fastener underneath. The size of my needle holder and pin case has been determined by the size of the cuff, so I've cut the second larger piece at the same size. This doesn't need wadding in the middle of it, and I'm just going to sew round all the edges, turn it inside out and iron it. To reduce the bulk at your corners, just cut at a 45-degree angle, making sure you don't go too close to the stitch line. This time, as I do my top stitch, I'm going to introduce the ties, and for this I've used some Eleganza sheer. It's chiffon ribbon, and I've cut about 6 inches, pointed end, and I'm going to turn over one end and then stitch it in on the short, halfway down the short side. Pin it first. You can continue to sew with your walking foot rather than changing backwards and forwards. Just be aware that it's quite noisy though, because it hasn't got that wadding to cushion the sound. Cut your wadding to size if you need to. Yeah. Cut some from the length and the width so that it'll fit inside the folded needle case, but make sure it's wide enough to fit your pins and needles comfortably. Place it in the centre of the inside of your needle case, and then I'm going to sew about 3 rows of stitching up and down just to secure it. For the pin cushion, I'm going to sew 2 pieces together that are 3.5 inches square, right sides together, leaving an opening to turn them through. No wadding yet in this. I've only got quite a small hole, so I've cut my wadding in small strips to stuff it. You can stuff it with any cotton wool or any spare wadding that you've got, just something that's soft, and then I'm going to hand stitch it across. Right, the spare bits of fabric I'm going to put back in my fabric stash, and I'm going to finish the rest by hand, and I'll show you how to finish them off while I'm sitting, but I need something to eat first. Right, from my recycled buttons box, I've selected 3 buttons, and these are mother of pearl that will show up nicely against both those fabrics. So here's my version then of the scissors holder. Remember that the button on the outside is purely decorative. The mug rug, the double-sided pin cushion, and the pin needle case, which opens out to gift some pins and some needles. And if I gift it to somebody that's my age, I might put some easy thread needles in there with some pins. It took me about 2 hours, but remember that I'm filming as well. So if this is your first project, I hope you enjoy it. I wanted to show that you could recycle shirts and those awkward pieces of the shirts that you didn't know what to do with, and recycle buttons, and to make something useful out of it. Right, this is Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter. Come back and join me again soon, won't you? Bye.